I'm Michael Poliakoff. I'm the president of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. And on behalf of AFSA, the Alumni Free Speech Alliance, and ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, we're just thrilled to have you here. I want to recognize that we have two members of our board of directors here tonight, Judith Messina and Mark Riddenauer. And it's a privilege for all of us to introduce our keynote speaker, Governor Scott Walker. His service to America and to American education are models for all of us. As Wisconsin's 45th governor, 2011 to 2019, and chair of the Republican Governors Association, he brought a level of fiscal responsibility to his state and to higher education that had not been seen before. It is not easy to do that. His Wisconsin budget repair led to a recall election, and he became the first governor in the history of the United States to win a recall election. Too many of our college presidents have folded to the pressure of vocal minorities in illegal encampments. But Governor Walker stared down 100,000 protesters in this lead up to the recall election. During Governor Walker's first term as governor, the state's $3.6 billion budget deficit yielded to a surplus, and taxes were cut by $200 billion. More than 100,000 jobs were created in the state of Wisconsin. It is unclear if any of the 100,000 protesters ever thanked him for the 100,000 new jobs. No. The redoubtable Chronicle of Higher Education, I almost said the comical of higher education, called him the anti-education governor in 2011. But the higher education establishment is just that. It is an establishment mired in the status quo, in stale habits, which is why we need the Alumni Free Speech Alliance so desperately. Now please. Now a decade plus later from his time as governor, we see his tenure reforms as visionary, starting the conversations around the nation of what is good for students rather than what props up the status quo. Governor Walker was an education governor, full stop. It is not in the least surprising that Governor Walker has led the Young Americans for Freedom and is aggressively working to protect the lifeblood of America, its freedom of speech. The thousands of students who benefit from the Young Americans for Freedom programs are, to all of us, a source of optimism, as we elsewhere witness the enemy on so many campuses. I know that his words will inspire and encourage us, the alumni here, to redouble the good work to restore and invigorate the intellectual diversity and freedom of expression on which any real education depends. I am so very happy to introduce Governor Scott Walker.
Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you to all of you here tonight. I'm going to begin with just a couple quick thoughts on the positive side. I'm going to lay out 5 things I think we need to do when it comes to free expression, free speech, and then I'm going to wrap it up at the tail end with a rather brief story to end on an optimistic note, and then I'll take some questions if we've got time before they give me the hook to come off the stage. But it's great to see all of you here. As was mentioned in the introduction, I love being governor. I didn't anticipate that within the first 2 months I'd have 100,000 people occupying my state capitol. I always say I apologize. The Occupy movement did not start on Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin, and eventually moved to New York City and here in D.C. and elsewhere. For my friends, we were just talking about the Bears and the Packers, to my friends from Illinois, I mentioned at one point, about 2 weeks in, I presume the national groups, at least the union bosses and others, had their attorneys working on this. I didn't think it came from Wisconsin, but they figured out that even though everything had flipped, so before I was governor in 2010, the governor, the state constitutional officers, both houses of the state legislature, and both U.S. senators were all the same party, not mine. And then they all flipped in the 2010 election. And we came in and we had these new majorities. They went along with things. But one of the things we didn't realize was even though the other party didn't have a majority, there was a little known provision in the state's constitution, never been invoked before, that required a quorum if you had an appropriations bill. So even though the other party didn't have a majority to block the bill, they, by virtue of leaving and going into Illinois, some went to Chicago, some went to the Clock Tower Inn in Rockford, were able to stall. And remember, unlike what happened a couple years ago here, it wasn't a few hours, it was actually almost a month that the Capitol was occupied. They crawled through the windows, they knocked over the state police, they did all sorts of other things. But eventually, we prevailed. We made the case to our friends in the legislature just to pull out the appropriation, set that aside, pass the reforms, come back later, and of course they were forced to come back. And after all of that, one of my dear friends, Sean Duffy, who's now on Fox Business News, and his wife, Rachel Campbell's Duffy, who's actually on Fox and Friends in the morning. He was the congressman. They were in northern Wisconsin at the time. And one of my favorite bumper stickers of all time was they gave me a bumper sticker that says, and remember, there were 14 Senate Democrats who left the state to forestall this. It said, "One walker beats 14 runners." So having said all that, it's interesting now because the role I'm at YAF, YAF.org if you're interested, for yourself, for students you work with, kids, grandkids, whoever. But YAF, it's interesting because I remember Stuart Varney, when I first was announced I was going to take on this role, I was on his show and he said, "Well, you're not young." And I said, "Well, compared to Biden and Trump, I am." Which is true. I'm actually a quarter century younger than the president, quite frankly. I am exactly a quarter century. But more than that, I said, it's not about the age. It's actually appropriate because when they sent those 100,000 protesters, some came from Wisconsin, but over time we could see by the insignia and the hats and the banners that they were coming from Washington, New York, New Jersey, Nevada, you name it, from all across the country. The reason they did that was simple. It was about intimidation. It was about intimidation. And so when I took on this new role working with college and now high school and middle school students as well, I told these students I could relate because it was about intimidation. They may not have 100,000 protesters in the classroom, but they're meant to feel like it. One of the greatest things I see when we have our conferences are students coming together and looking around realizing they're not alone, that there actually are other people who think like them. And I got to tell you, many of you can relate to this as well. It's not just students. There's a lot of educators, a lot of faculty and staff that I talk to, certainly a lot of trustees and regents who come to gatherings like this and go, "I'm not alone." There's actually other people who believe in common sense out there, who actually think that higher education in general is not about teaching students how to think, but how to think critically. That's not a Republican or a Democrat idea. That's not solely a conservative liberal idea. That's just a fundamental American truth. You know, that's what we should be about. I was saying at the dinner table, I can still remember as a kid, one of my favorite teachers was a guy named Mr. Scott, no relation. Although once my brother, who was 3 years younger, accidentally was called in his same class, David was his name, he was called Scott, and he said, "That's okay, Mr. David," but he didn't do that again. But Mr. Scott, I found out years later, was active in the Democrat Party. I never knew that because he was a great educator. He taught us to read the classics. He taught us to look at the construction of speeches and great comments throughout the history of the world. And that's what education is supposed to be about. And so tonight I want to give a couple thoughts on free expression, but just one other little bit of upbeat optimism to tell you about this new role that I'm in. So in addition to doing conferences, we have the Reagan Ranch out in California. President Reagan was involved with our group years ago. We have conferences out there. We have conferences here in D.C. We do them regionally around the country. We also are the largest right-of-center campus lecture series in America. So we do more conservative, free enterprise, right-of-center. Basically anybody to the right of Karl Marx is classified conservative on most campuses, but we have more than any others out there. And some of them are real popular. You've heard of before: Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Katie Pavlich. But one of ours who started out unknown a long time before I was there and now is very popular, Ben Shapiro, is not only a popular speaker for us, he actually has perfected this model that now almost all the rest of our speakers use on campus. And that is, we come on campus and say maybe we have an hour, hour and a half with students. At least half, if not more of the time, is Q&A. And this is something that Ben, if you've ever watched him, and by the way, if you watch him on our YouTube channel, you can actually turn the speed down to 3/4 because Ben talks really, really fast. But if you've ever watched it or been at one, you'll see that one of the things he's perfected that now others emulate is at the Q&A time, he says, if you disagree with me, raise your hand and you go to the front of the line. So we have a microphone out there. We put it on not just for the students. We put it up on the screen, but we also broadcast it. And if you disagree, you can go to the front of the line. And it's interesting because the students love it. In fact, they love it even more. One of the best things the left does for our speakers is protest in advance. Because most of the people who come to our speeches are not conservative, they're not liberal, they're just curious. They're just trying to figure it out. And so when there's all this fuss and hype with the protests coming in, it actually makes these curious students want to show up and figure out what's going on. And then they hear these questions, many of which are the same students or TAs or others that they've heard in their classroom making these same tired old arguments. But then they hear people like Ben and others just systematically walking through the facts and giving a counter that so many of them sadly have not heard in the classroom or on the campus. And they're hungry for it. We broadcast every one of our lectures plus our conferences. And it's interesting. We're not like PragerU. I love PragerU, but we don't do any pre-programmed programming. All of our stuff are live interchanges that we have in person with students. And the most exciting part for the people who tune in are the Q&A. Hard to believe, but our YouTube channel, YAF TV, now has 1.6 million subscribers. Yeah. Last year alone, on all of our platforms, we surpassed 1.3 billion, with a B, billion views. And why I tell you that is not to brag on YAF, but rather to tell you optimistically what that tells me is people are hungry. They're hungry for hearing more than one side of the equation. You know, someone asked me after the 2022 elections, I pointed out, despite all the hype and the media said there'd be a red wave, I said there wasn't. It wasn't solely because of candidate quality. It wasn't solely because of one particular issue, as many of the media defaulted to. I said it was younger voters. 18 to 29-year-old voters were the big margin in Pennsylvania and Arizona, Georgia, and other states out there. So what was interesting about that, pointing that out, was I said there's a way to make inroads, but it's not in campaign ads. It's by giving another side to the story. Someone in the media asked me after I said that if I was afraid of younger voters. I said, I'm not afraid of younger voters. I'm afraid of younger voters who've only heard one side of the story. And so that's where there's been a failure in education, K through 12, as well as higher education in many places across the country, to give people more than just one side of the story. And so free expression, free speech is a fundamental part about that. When you think about that, so our freedoms, endowed by our Creator, defined, spelled out very clearly, defended and protected by our Constitution. These are things that are inherent to being Americans. These are things that, I mean, it's even been interesting watching some of the royals and others in Britain talking about how they don't get this whole free speech thing and how can you possibly say this or that. Well, as you all know, particularly on institutions of higher education, it's under threat right now. And yet, if you think about it, Free speech shouldn't just be a constitutionally protected right. It should be something revered on our colleges and universities. It should be the very place where we speak the most strongly about the importance of free expression and free speech, right? My two sons are a year apart. One's 29, one's 28. Years ago, one went to Marquette University, a Jesuit Catholic institution. The other went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, which, if you're familiar with it, it's a little bit left of Berkeley. We used to say about Madison, it was 70 square miles in Wisconsin surrounded by reality. But it was one of those where I didn't mind because he got involved, he got engaged, he got around people that thought and shared ideas like he did, but he wasn't afraid to go to the classroom and debate those and have discussions. And we weren't afraid for him to be exposed to those as long as that wasn't the only thing he was exposed to. Now at that campus, by and large, we had to make up for it with other groups like ours and others to counter it. But I'm not afraid for my own kids, someday my grandkids, to hear views that compete with mine as long as mine are represented equally on the playing field. Because I feel strong enough about those ideas. And I think that's just core. If we're going to have if we're going to continue to have the republic that we have, if we're going to be the leader that we are, not just amongst our own people, but in the world, we cannot let that sit by the wayside. We can't just have comatose zombies that all think and express the same thing. We've got to be willing to challenge thoughts and come up with new ideas and push them going forward. And so, boy, we have a timely example of this challenge. I was telling Michael and some others about this when we were sharing drinks upstairs, and so last night, University of California, Los Angeles. So UCLA, where just a few weeks ago, we saw those horrific images of not just the encampments and the protests, but of Jewish students feeling absolutely threatened, of Jewish professors not being able to go onto campus. I mean, some of this stuff, when you think about race and religion in particular, are things that my father, who's deceased about 5.5 years ago, a Baptist minister, and I think about him and his generation, how mortified they'd be for all the things that they worked on in the 50s and 60s, and my grandparents and others who, I still remember my mother was born in 1955. She went to Girls State down in Illinois. One of her best friends till the day she died a year and a half ago was a woman named Jewel Sims, who is from Chicago, Illinois. Jewel was black, my mom was white. Jewel came from a big city. My mom came from a farm outside of Belvedere, Illinois. They became good friends and were friends for the rest of their life till the day Jewel died. But the fall after they went to Girls State, my mother and my grandparents brought Jewel over to stay, and they went into town to have a bite to eat, and that particular restaurant wouldn't serve them because Jewel was black. My grandparents walked out of that place and never went back again. I think about that generation and the things that they did, not because they cared about the color of people's skin, but they cared about humanity, the human race out there, and the differences they made. And think about what's happening on our campuses now. It's just shocking out there. But we saw at UCLA, so all this is happening, like sadly so many other campuses across the country. And then we decided, through our students that are active there, not to counter with our own riots or protests, but rather to bring a speaker in. So we brought a speaker in, Robert Spencer, someone who focuses on countering the myths that are pushed against Israel by many in the pro-Hamas crowd out there. We set it up. We have a sanctioned organization, chartered through a student organization. We have students there doing it. They get authorization to come on campus. They get a room reserved. And wouldn't you know it, a couple minutes before 6 o'clock Pacific time last night, the doors are locked. The doors are locked. What's their excuse? Well, there's all these reports of protest. So the heckler's veto works, right? The heckler's veto is saying, oh, well, if there's other people who oppose your point of view, heckle enough, if they say they're going to be violent enough, if they're going to be out of control enough, they can shut you down. Just absolutely outrageous. But this is what we're up against. Now, the good news there at UCLA is that's a state institution. So just like we sued when they tried to do the same sort of thing at UC Berkeley a few years ago with Ben Shapiro, we're going to win that case because we've set the wheels in motion. We're going to go to court. We'll go to court in our case, and we do with partners, with ADF, with FIRE, with other organizations out there. We'll go with any partner we can, not just for our students, but any other student who runs into this kind of dilemma, because we can't let it stand. We can't even let it stand one time. We've got to push back over and over again. So tonight I want to highlight a number of things that I think get to the heart of this. First off, at a minimum, every institution that we are connected with, whether you're alumni, whether you're a trustee, whether it's just in your community your kids are going to along the way, at the minimum, we have to demand a clear and concise statement about freedom of expression. Obviously, adopting, as you spell out very specifically in your website and your documents about the Chicago principles of free expression, that's a minimum. And part of how you can push back on that, I think, particularly for those of your alums, is with your dollars. I mean, quite frankly, if they can't even start out with that, if they can't have a clear and concise statement of what free expression is, and we saw the benefit of people like Bill Eichmann and others wising up and saying, it's time that money talks, whether it's personal donations, corporate donations, foundation donations, or for that matter, public institutions lobbying your governor and your state lawmakers to say, until those institutions have a clear statement of free expression, of free speech for every student on that campus, we should be pulling back funding. We should be sending a clear and concise message going forward. Secondly, I'd say that's a minimum. On top of that, one of the big things that I think often gets overlooked, not by you, but by probably others out there talking about this topic, is not just having a statement, but having it enforceable. I'll give you a good example. A couple years ago, a private college, small college, South Central Wisconsin, Beloit College, our YAF chapter there brought in Eric Prince. Eric got a little bit of extra attention, not only because of his military background, because his sister is Betsy DeVos. Right? So the protesters just went doubly nuts, right? They just went out of control. So what do they do on this campus? They came in, and not only did they protest in the middle, took over this auditorium for 40 minutes, they filled the entire stage up with chairs from the floor to the ceiling and blocked Eric Prince and the others from actually even physically getting on the stage. Now, the next day, the administration gave lip service to how this wasn't right, but nothing ever happened. If you don't have enforceable standards, a principle, a statement of free speech means nothing. It means nothing. It's one of the things we pushed back when I was governor, and the regions I appointed was not just establish it, but have some teeth in it. You can debate the specifics. To me, I think it's simple. You get one warning, the second one, you're expelled. That's it. Think about how quickly people would wise up and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. Now, you can debate whether that's too far or not. Some of you might actually be more than me. You might say one and you're done. But I think there's got to be some meat behind that, right? There's got to be some teeth in that proposal. You've got to have a way to actually enforce that despite saying this, because again, we saw this, there are state laws in Wisconsin that say it is illegal. It is against the law to have a camp in a tent overnight on any University of Wisconsin property. And yet, we saw a lot of them out there. The Code of Conduct, the Code of Student Conduct, the California state system says you can't encamp on a campus. Probably other colleges and universities across the country have that. And yet, how many days, how many nights did we see those encampments up there? If there's not consequences, are we shocked if this keeps happening over and over and over again? Third, even if you have those statements, even if you have enforceability, you need to make sure that you have administrators who don't give lip service to free speech, right? So, University of California, the example I mentioned earlier about Berkeley that we wanted, in their case, they were smart. Berkeley, 50 years ago, being the home of the free speech movement, the irony, of course, is not lost on me, that many of the people who were against the man, against the institution, against the administration, are now the man themselves, denying free speech to people on the opposite end of the political spectrum. But they were at least smart enough in that instance when we tried to bring Ben Shapiro on campus. They didn't say no. They thought they were clever. They said, well, you can't advertise. Oh, and you can't bring him in after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, and by the way, we're going to charge you 5 to 6 times the security cost that we charge other groups, not because you need more, but because the people who oppose you are going to create such a ruckus that we need to protect you from them. Now, even in the 9th District out there in California, we won, right? We won. They had to settle. Sure. In fact, that's part of the impetus that we're going to use for this suit against UCLA. And for us, we didn't care about money. It's not about money. It's not about punishment. It's about changing the policy. making sure you have an enforceable policy that the administration actually adheres to. It's not enough to just say it. You can't just give lip service. Another good example of this, and why you can't be, for those of us trying to be stalwart on this, you can't give up. You can't give an inch, right? You can't back down. So University of Wisconsin-Madison, right in my backyard. This school year, we've had Shapiro there. We had him there right after October 7th. Imagine what that speech was like, right? Ben Shapiro on campus. Then we had Matt Walsh in. Protesters, just funniest thing, one of the protesters out there sat out in front, ate an entire Bible. I said, it's one way to get the word of God into the students, right? But did all that, right? Objected to all this. But finally, earlier this spring, we had Michael Knowles came to campus, another one of their colleagues at a group called the Daily Wire. Well, in this case, they put on these absurd security costs. And two other speakers, just as well known, if not more so. No problems there. Yet a different administrator imposed this. Now, we invoked the UC Berkeley case, and they backed down when they were threatened. But the reality is, why should our students have to go to us to go to court? Again, colleges should be the place setting the example for free speech, for free expression. They shouldn't be the place where you only get there if you go to court and threaten legal action against them. It's just outrageous along the way. So again, have the statements, make them enforceable, but then make sure the administration doesn't just give it lip service. Fourth, academic freedom. Now, we could spend all night on this, but I'm just going to summarize a little bit of this. You know, and you guys rightfully so, again, on your checklist of this, talk about diversity of thought. I say I'm all for diversity. I want diversity. I want us to be respectful of not just by category, but of all of us. I mean, e pluribus unum. You know, one of the beauties of America is we all have different backgrounds. We all come from different places. We all have different experiences, and that's what makes this country wonderful. Together, you know, it's like the threads of the strands of the red, white, and blue Old Glory. You know, if you look over at the Smithsonian, and you can see over the years how they were pulled apart on that great image of Old Glory, but it's different strands coming together, making us the fabric of America. It's so great out there. So I'm not against diversity, but how about a little diversity of thought? You know, 25 years ago in one of the national surveys of faculty, they said about 45% at that time, quarter century ago, about 45% identified as liberal. 10 years ago, in a survey done every 3 years, it was about 60%. Today, I'd hate to even imagine what the latest survey is going to come out saying. You go to Madison, where when I used to be governor, I'd go back and down the street. I remember back in 2016. Madison is so far to the left, they still have Bernie Sanders 2016 signs up. And that's because for them, for those professors and other faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, they think Hillary Clinton was too moderate, right? I mean, that's how far off it is. And if you look not just overall statistically, those are numbers that include like faculty from the business school and the School of Engineering. If you look at the humanities, arts and sciences, it's almost non-existent. And so think about these poor kids that, you know, then go in the real world and realize they're shocked, just shocked that there's a diversity of opinion out there. It's kind of like the reporter at CBS News back after the 2000 election who couldn't believe that George W. Bush won because everyone she knew voted for Al Gore. Like, well, maybe your fault is you're in the media and everyone you know voted for Al Gore. Maybe you should go talk to some other people across America who don't have exactly the same beliefs that you do, and you get a little different exposure out there. And so diversity of thought, I think, again, is one of those that is just so critical to this. We found time and time again, not with surveys done by our group or conservative groups, University of Wisconsin system sanctioned a survey last year of all the students in the University of Wisconsin system. Similar survey was done of students in the North Carolina system. Consistently in surveys like that done by their own systems, anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of the self-identified conservative right-of-center students said they are self-censoring in the classroom and on the campus. And I would argue if you look at, there aren't as frequently done surveys like that, but there are others out there, that not only right of center, but even mainstream politically, professors are self-centering. It's not just the students, it's the faculty themselves, many of whom actually believe in free speech, are censoring their thoughts just along the way. And so we need to push back on that. One last quick example of that, and that is last 32 years, we do a commencement address survey. And not surprisingly, this year, out of the top 100 colleges and universities, you know how many had conservative speakers? 4. But of that, actually one's right. 3 of them were business leaders who talked nothing about their political beliefs and just happened to be identified as being conservative. Only one, a professional athlete, actually is conservative and talked about it, beliefs. All the rest were at the other end of the spectrum. Now, that's not unusual. Sadly, that's been the case for the last few years. Doesn't surprise me. But in this last moment, on the way out, the very last thing you're left with is to say, no, we're not changing. We're not offering any diversity of thought. We're just going to do the same old same thing. But what really was troubling to me is in that survey, we also found out that of the top 100, 84 institutions, 84 of the top 100 had segregated commencement ceremonies based on race, sex, gender, or sexual orientation. What kind of community do you have on a college campus when you have to have commencement addresses that are segregated? I mean, just unbelievable. No wonder we have the kind of challenges that we have out there. And so it's, again, not things that you're doing, but things to be pushed back on. The last thing, I'll just say the fifth point, oh, by the way, and thank you. I know there's a number of different alumni groups here, but in our case, for example, the Jefferson Council has helped us at UVA, bringing people like Mike Pompeo. Thank you. The Generals Redoubt did similar work with us at Williams and Lee, so thank you. Thank you. We appreciate there's many out there helping us out along the way, get that message out, and at least have some balance, right? But the fifth thing I would just end with, and then I want to tell you one quick story and take some questions. Leadership matters, but systematic change is more important. What do I mean by that? So leadership matters. My man Mitch Daniels, great leader at Purdue University. Great friend of mine. Actually, the year before I ran for governor, I did the unusual thing. I actually went and spent a week with Mitch, who was governor of Indiana at the time, and I decided I would run after I spent a week deciding I could do the kind of things he'd done in Indiana. Usually in politics, people run and they figure out what they're going to do afterwards. I actually went down and said, Mitch is really good. I want to do this. I kind of supersized it, but got a little bit more attention he did at the time. But Mitch, fabulous guy, great governor, great president. About 2 months after he retired, our YAF chapter at Purdue brought Michael Knowles into campus. I had to call Mitch because even 2 months after this great leader made free speech, made good organization a hallmark of his tenure, less than 2 months after that, our chapter got grief and was being bullied from being able to bring in a speaker on campus. So I called Mitch, and as I expected, by 11 o'clock that night, the provost had called our attorney and said, you've got a green light, go ahead. But it shouldn't have to take a call from a former governor to another former governor to get a campus to actually allow someone to come and speak, right? That should be a given. They followed the rules. They took what they were supposed to do. So I say that when you look at people like him, you look at Ben Sass. But in Ben Sass's case, Ben's a great leader. Don't get me wrong. He is a great leader. But it helps having a governor and a legislature that actually have made statutory changes. You know, you mentioned the things that we did in Wisconsin with Act 10. The reason they're still working wasn't just because I was the leader at the time. The reason they're still working is because we changed the laws. We made systematic changes. And if we're going to fundamentally get our colleges and our universities back on track, not for the sake of systems, but for the sake of students, we need to not only recruit great leaders, but we need to back them up with the resources and the attention and the intellectual information and ammunition they need to make systematic changes so that even when those leaders leave, when those leaders move on to retirement or whatever else the next assignment is, it doesn't all collapse. Last thing I'll leave you with optimism is this. So about a year before I took over as president of YAV, the president at the time, Ron Robinson, asked me to speak at a number of campuses. He gave me some nice, easy assignments, places like Cornell, Stanford, other places like that. And the good news is I'm used to protest, you know, so when 500 protesters show up, I'm like, come on, I had 100,000, you know, this is nothing, right? So last place I was at, 2020, about 2 weeks before everything got shut down with the pandemic, was Stanford. And I had protesters, but you know what? And God bless you. And we did this with not just our own chapters. We actually do more campus lectures for the college Republicans than the college Republicans do nationally. So we'll work with any number of conservative groups, Buckley at Yale, others like that. We'll work with not just our own chapters, but others. And so in this case, it was the CRs. And afterwards, after this event with the protest, but the Q&A went well, took some negative ones, but I'm used to it. I asked the 3 kids who organized this event, 3 students, a little bit about them. I want to know, like, what are you majoring in? What are your hopes? What are your careers, goals? And then I asked them how they became conservatives. 2 of the 3, totally what you'd expect. Parents, their upbringing, their background, their school. This 3rd kid named John says, oh, no. He says, my parents, they're dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. I said, well, John, how'd you get to this point where you're at now? He said, well, I was in my dad's car driving one time in high school, and I'm driving for about an hour, and I get bored. I turn on the radio, and I'm trying to figure something interesting to listen to. I found this guy on the radio that was entertaining. He was funny. What he said made sense to me, so every time he got in the radio, or got in the car, he turned the radio on. You can kind of guess who I'm talking about, right? And he said he was just a lot of fun, but he made sense. And he said not only did I listen to him, I'd read his stuff he'd talk about. I'd read the books and the articles and the other stuff. He said, so by the time he got to Stanford University, his mother's alma mater, this kid was a full-blooded conservative, the best kind you'd want. Not because of osmosis, but because he'd actually thought through these issues. He'd really been challenged, the kind of intellectual, dialogue that you'd love to have every student have access to. He had been presented one side, and he looked at the other, and he made a decision that he thought it was better, that true freedom and opportunity don't come from the clumsy hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies to the dignity of hard work. I'm like, I want to hug this guy. What a great story. But here's what makes it greater. John Rice Cameron happens to be the son of Susan Rice. So Susan Rice, key advisor, part of the administration in Barack Obama's administration, key advisor, now part of the campaign of Joe Biden. Her son is still not just in college. Last year when Joe Biden's chief of staff put out a list on X right before Thanksgiving that said, here's the talking points for your crazy uncle, on Thanksgiving, she retweeted, or your son. So I emailed John, who's now in finance down in Houston. John, we still got your back. Happy Thanksgiving. If you need our help, we're right here. But the reason why I end by telling you that is kind of the way I started, with telling you how hungry these kids are to hear more than one side of the story. I'm not afraid. I don't need conservative professors. I don't need conservative media. I just need a level playing field. I have enough strength and belief in the things that I believe in, the things that I think America was founded on, that I am given that chance. But too many people want to cancel it. It's why when North Carolina proposed a 3-credit requirement, for every student who went to a public institution, they had to be taught in government, where they actually had to read the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, at least 5 papers of the Fellows Papers, the letter from Birmingham jail, just simple things, not telling them how they had to teach it, but just read those. Nearly 700 tenured professors at UNC Chapel Hill said, no, that's against their academic freedom. Why do they do that? Because they want to be the conduits to which they can tell those students whether America is good or bad. I have enough belief in people like John Rice Cameron that if given the chance, they're going to make wise decisions based on knowing all the facts. And that's what we should be striving for. It's not just about getting our chance to have our say. It's about, if we really want to save this beloved republic that's nearly 250 years old, a couple years from now. Oh, I hate to think of the protest in Philadelphia that day. God for help us. But think about this great republic. If we truly want to save it, it starts on our colleges and universities by making sure that every student deserves the right to hear from more than one point of view. You are helping to make that possible. God bless you for doing that. Sure. Thanks. So, I'll take a couple quick questions before they kick me off. I'll go, you had your hand up first, and I'll go here. I think he's got a roving mic there, so here, and then I'll go to you there. It's the first ones I saw on the light, so good.
Well, Governor, I want to give a shout out to YAF. I'm the president of the Jefferson Council, Tom Neal. We got Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Kellyanne Conway, and Mia Love.
Yeah.
Thanks to you guys.
Yeah.
But here's the negative, not of you all, but the problem the kids go through. Nick Cabrera was our president. We made chapter of the year. I think the next year was so intimidated by the grief that he caught, exactly to your point. The chapter kind of didn't fold, but it went down. So I think it's and we're there as their wingmen, but you guys bring incredible speakers to campus. We hadn't had a conservative speaker in a decade until that happened. But it's up to these groups to tell these students we've got your back.
Yep.
And we're trying to help you rejuvenate the chapter. Pat Coyle, by the way, does a great job. But I use these guys. They have an incredible bevy of speakers, and they really do a good job. So.
Yeah, and for that point, thank you, because any college or university you're involved with, we'd love to have. Somebody asked me once if we have a chapter at Hillsdale. I said we do, but we don't need one. But we want to go. It's the same reason why, if someone asked me why we're on YouTube with all the pushback and big tech, I said we're going to go where students are. We're going to go where the fight is, and we're going to bring it. And but you're right, students. Number one thing they say when they come to our conferences is they can't believe that they're not alone. They just are taught that there's something wrong with them. Pushback. So, go ahead.
Hi, Jenna Robinson with the Martin Center in North Carolina. And first, I wanted to give an update and say we got that civics requirement over the line.
Nice.
It is now the law in North Carolina. But I wanted to ask, because all of us are in the position of finding speakers for our chapters, what are the qualities we should look for in a speaker who only has an hour or maybe an hour and a half to talk to students to change hearts and minds? Like, what do you see in your experience is the most effective thing that students are looking for when they're curious?
Well, right, because first of all, good reminder, there's a lot of great groups out there, and somebody always asks what my competition is, and I say it's the liberal professor, it's the out-of-control administrator, it's the crazy big tech executive. It's not some other group on the right. But there are other groups that do things that are much more like rallies. Nothing wrong with being inspired, but I said we got to go to where the curious students are, because we're probably not going to change the rabidly radical, and we already got a handful of our folks. So who do you want? You want the curious kids, the kids that are up in the air. And so it's when you have people come on campus or in other venues where there's students, it's really important to think about who the audience is. It's not just about revving up the bass. It's about how do you make the appeal. So there's two overall themes I would say that are really important with Generation Z that have nothing to do with politics directly, but yet they have everything to do with it. And that is Generation Z puts a premium on authenticity and fairness. Authenticity and fairness. If you want something to go viral, you can't make it go viral. We did more lectures this school year than we've ever done before at YEF. That's not only important for the students there, that gives us more content to then put up on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram, everything else, and that's how things go viral. It's those moments. So, give you an example. In your neck of the woods, UNC Greenboro. So the chapter there retweeted something that should be fairly obvious, but they retweeted a statement that Ben Shapiro made that said, men are men, women, or men can't be women can't be men, that's just science. And they retweeted it, and the campus there went apoplectic. They tried to pull their charter. One of the members of the executive board was a student senator. They tried to impeach him. They went totally out of control. And so we say when someone's under attack, YEF's got your back. So we decided more than just sending our staff down there, we told the chair at the time, we said, go find the biggest auditorium, the biggest space you can find at all. So she went and reserved the gymnasium. So we said, okay, we're bringing Ben Shapiro down to speak to your students. So, bring the big dog in if you're going to do that. So we had 2,000 students inside, another 1,500 outside. We broadcast this, though, and there was one interchange between a graduate student who got up in line, raised his hand, and he was just totally thought he was, I don't know, he'd never seen a Ben Shapiro video, obviously, because he thought he was totally shaming Ben Shapiro, and thought he was a physicist, a mathematician, all this stuff. Well, that one exchange in a 5-minute YouTube short got 27 million views. With that, so what I'd say is authenticity. Kids are hungry for this. They want to hear. They want to compete. They want to hear different ideas. They're missing that. They know there's something wrong when they're not hearing one side of the view. So find speakers who are willing to engage. You don't want people who just want to sit at the bully pulpit and speak to the choir. You don't want somebody who's just preaching the choir. It's okay to get the choir to go sing, but in the end, if you're going to make inroads, you got people that are willing to take tough questions and to listen to them. If you look at our speakers, they don't just have their talking points. They'll listen to what they say and then walk them through why they're misguided or why they're off on that, but systematically go through. I think that's really powerful. The other part is fairness. As conservatives, we've thought for too long with our head and talked with our head. The left thinks and talks with their heart. We should think with our head but talk from our heart. And so fairness is really important. But like every time Joe Biden talks about people paying their fair share, I say, sure. You make 10 times more than me, you pay 10 times more in taxes. That's a flat tax. That's fair. Not asking corporations and people with wealth to pay more than anybody else, but pay a flat rate. Everybody pays the same. What's more fair than that? God only asked for 10%. Why do you need a bigger percentage than that? But it's not that they have to make that argument, but you know what I mean? It's just fairness and authenticity, and in the larger context, take people who are willing to take questions and listen. One last other tidbit on an issue where we still have a lot of work to do with young people, and that's on the climate. If you listen to like that first presidential debate that was in Milwaukee with Republicans, somebody asked about climate, and every one of them called it a hoax. Ooh. Now, my opinion is not much different than the people that were up on that stage, but if you're trying to appeal to younger voters, if you're talking to your own kids or grandkids, do not call climate change a hoax, because a wall will go right up. Because from the time they were little until wherever point they're in school right now, they've been told, not just the problem, they've been told they're going to die from it. They actually view it as an existential threat. It doesn't mean you can't make inroads in there, but for example, when I'm on campus, and someone asked me about it, I asked them, how many of you students remember when you were on campus being told that if you got a COVID shot, you'd never get COVID? All the hands go up. I said, how many of you got the shot and still got COVID? Hands stay up, right? I said, now I'm not here to debate COVID. I'm not here to debate the shot. That's not my point. But I'm saying the people who told you the science was clearly didn't know what they're talking about, and you lost 1.5 years of your college that you paid for, that you deserved to be in the classroom, because they were wrong on that. Maybe those same people aren't completely right about climate. So they're like, oh, okay. So when you think of speakers, it can't just be people talking at people. It's got to be an interchange. It's got to be a discussion. Certainly don't put anybody up at a podium somewhere who's not willing to take tough questions, because that'll actually backfire on you on a college campus. Sure. Oh, back there, here and there.
For the last 2 decades, there's been a decline in state support of public universities. And given that fact, I wonder whether strategically there should be a focus on the state legislatures versus alumni. I wanted your view on that.
Yes, but I'd say not one or the other, all the above. Because I found, at least at the University of Wisconsin, but I think now working with a lot of colleges and universities, administrators pay attention to money wherever it's coming from. And so whether it's coming from the legislature, whether it's coming from alumni, what's coming from tuition, they pay attention to it. So as many sources as possible. But it's really interesting. So our state legislature in Wisconsin, there's a Democrat governor, Republican legislature. They tried to cut the funding for DEI positions out. The Nonpartisan Legislative Fiscal Bureau, in preparing their budget amendment, estimated system-wide it cost about $25 million for the administration of DEI within the system as a whole. Governor, of course, vetoed that out. Well, they held up pay increases for all university faculty and staff until they got some movement on that. And so, to me, on any of these issues, whether it's that or anything else, you gotta have people ready to play hardball. I think the point was raised, you said earlier, we win, they lose, right? I said, you can't just say, I got a nice press release out, because over time, people are gonna retreat. So you gotta keep charging forward. So yes, I think alumni, some more than others, collectively, all of us can have an impact, but certainly a guy like a Bill Aikman or the alum at Penn that pulled $100 million, that gets people's attention. But I also think, even with declining support, most state institutions still get anywhere from 25 to 50 or to 40% other funding in some way or another from the university, particularly on the capital side. And if you get state lawmakers and governors to do something about that, it will definitely get attention.
We have time for one more question, Governor.
Okay. One back there.
BDS. A lot of protest groups are asking that universities boycott, divest, and sanction the state of Israel. So I'd like your thoughts on the following, that the universities should say, that's what you want? Fine. At the same time, we will cut all financial and academic ties with Qatar, with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, and with Palestine. How would that work?
Yeah. Well, the speaker we had last night at UCLA was prepared to point out the unbelievable myths, and I won't spend the rest of the night talking about that, about those protesters and what they think about Israel and how fundamentally wrong it is. I mean, even if you're talking about indigenous people, the Jewish people in Israel have a pretty good case to make about, we're the first ones there, if you know anything about history. But that aside, one of my favorite new speakers we have is a guy named Enos Cantor Freedom. Right? So Enos is awesome. Enos actually spoke to our kids about 2 weeks after October 7th, which he's a great speaker, but I didn't quite know what to expect because Enos is a Muslim. Came from Turkey. Kind of his claim to fame when he was playing in the NBA was that he spoke out about Turkey. He's actually got a price on his head because he spoke out against the administration and the atrocities in Turkey. But I didn't know quite what he'd say after that, but we didn't cancel him because we're not canceling, right? He actually gave the most fabulous lecture, if you get a chance to look at it, to these students and supporters there at this high school conference about, think about this. He said when he was a kid in Turkey, a bunch of kids he was playing with wanted him to join them because they were spitting and stomping on both the American and the Israeli flag. Not uncommon, right, in terms of disdain. And he didn't want to do it, and he went home, he ran home, and he talked to his mother. And his mother said, son, you should never hate someone you've never met. Stuck with him the rest of his life. You should never hate someone you've never met. And so he talked later about how when he was an NBA star, one of his great joys was he went to Israel, and he had a big basketball camp with both Israeli or Jewish and so-called Palestinian kids playing basketball together. They didn't care. They were kids. They were having a good time. And it was just really, really powerful. Besides that being a nice story, I said it's interesting. So he was fine in the NBA by calling out Turkey. You know what got him cut from playing in the NBA? It's when he started putting paintings on his shoes of the Uyghurs in the concentration camps in China. In actual concentration camps, re-education camps as they call them. But think about all these people who suddenly woke up, although they can't tell you what sea the river to the sea is. Is it the Nile? Is it the Mississippi? They don't know it's the Jordan, right? But they can't tell you that, but suddenly they're all now concerned about Palestine. But where were they when the atrocities happened in Syria? Where were they when Muslims who are held today in concentration camps in China under the CCP? You talk about divestment. Why are we allowing Confucius institutions on our college campuses to try and re-educate our kids at a time when they're doing all this? I think for a lot of these things, it goes back to the power of knowledge, the power of ideas, of pushing back. It's why having these engages, for your point about bringing speakers in, having people who are not afraid to take tough questions, but then counter them with logic, with facts, with the truth. You know, there's a reason why I think so many on the left block so many of our lectures, don't want free expression, don't want enforceable free speech policies, because they don't want guys like John Rice Cameron hearing the other side of the story. Because if Susan Rice's son can figure out where he needs to be in America today based upon hearing more than one point of view, a whole lot more young people can along the way, and it's up to us to give them the right at least to hear more than one side of the story. Thanks.